Thanks for joining me. The plan for today is to look through motivating our teenagers. I'm going to be honest with you up front. If I had the key and the secret to motivating teens, you know where I'd be, living on the beach, hanging on a hammock, because it is such a complicated situation. It's such a complicated thing to be working with. But there are a whole range of different little things that we can do that can help us as teachers really support our learners and help them feel like they're a part of our group. Okay, and throughout today's session, the plan is to look at three key points. Number one, making it clear, making it relevant, and making it engaging. Number two, thinking about who are you? And number three, trying to be realistic with technology. We know that technology is a real big factor that motivates teens, especially. Most of them, or a lot of teens nowadays, have mobile phones and they want to have them on them all the time. And this is just a sign of how teens react to technology. But we're going to look a bit at how we can, as teachers, help support our learners with that. So without further ado, we'll crack on. Please do participate in the chat box. I love to hear your comments and see what you've got to say. Let me know if any of the ideas I'm going to be sharing today are they hit home with you. Also, any questions, do share in the chat box as well. I do keep an eye on it as we go through. So number one, making it clear, make it relevant, make it engaging. Really what we're going to be seeing here are three key points. Number one, look at outlining our objectives for our group and try to encourage them to set their own objectives as well. What we want is for our learners to really know what they are doing, but on a side note, to also really take ownership of their learning. We want them to say, I want to learn this, not just I'm learning it because you told me to. So that's point number one. Number two, we want to give them opportunities to personalize the content. We want our learners to take hold of what we're giving them and what we're teaching them in class and make it their own. At the end of the day, we use language mostly to talk about ourselves or things going on in our lives or to have an emotional connection with someone. And we can't do that if we don't encourage our learners to practice that skill. And finally, this is one more for us as teachers, that is to listen with our eyes just as much as our ears. Okay, sometimes the most obvious things are left unsaid. We want to be aware of our kids in our classes and really try to think about how we as teachers can make it more engaging for them. Okay, so let's have a look. Number one, make it clear, make it relevant. What are we doing? So number one, we're talking about teens. Teens love the weird and wonderful. They love the strange and the abstract. Really, that's a big difference from primary learners, right? Primary learners tend to like the routine and the structure, and I know what I'm talking about. Teens are starting to explore the world, but they still have that in them. They still want structure, they still want organization, and they still want a familiar starting point. That is the first thing we really want to be thinking about. We want to make sure that our learners have something they can hold on to and then move forward with. So on the left, you can see an example here. There's a lovely big picture. I think it's quite a familiar point, being a family and all, right? And the idea is that we encourage our learners to link to that and then move forward beyond and think more critically, think more abstractly about what they see. So one thing that I really like to do with my teens is at the start of every unit, right? Encourage them to predict what they're going to see, give them an opportunity to share knowledge and opinions. And now I have my first question for you guys. In the chat box, if you would you tell me some questions that you think we could ask a group of teens? Okay, so this picture on the left-hand side of the family, what questions might you ask your teenage group about it? I'll give you a few seconds to maybe share some ideas in the chat box. Why are they smiling is a lovely one. Yeah, straight in with the emotional connection. I like that. Do you enjoy going out with your friends? Nice. Friends and family is a great link as well. Does anyone else want to share some ideas? Lovely, Sonny. I really like that. How important is your family to you? Why do you think they're so happy? Could you describe the emotions conveyed by this picture? Again, all really lovely examples. Oof, that's a good one. What kind of family are you? That's a toughie as well. I think that would really spur a lot of conversation. Nice. So nice. How do you feel when you see people smiling like that? They say smiles are contagious, right? Lovely. Yeah, do keep them coming in, and I'll move on a bit. So here's a couple of suggestions that I like to use. I've gone a bit different from you guys. I've said, where do you think these people are? How do you think they're feeling? Would you feel the same if you were in their shoes? And why do you, who do you think took the photo? And more importantly, who is behind the camera? Okay, so if we think about those three questions, why are they good starting points for our lessons? Why are we focusing on this? Well, I'm encouraging the learners to think beyond the forefront of the picture, right? We're thinking in depth. We're thinking about describing the backgrounds. I can see mountains. Maybe they're on a family trip. Maybe they're on a family holiday. Maybe they've gone on a day trip somewhere. All these little things start to encourage conversation. Number two, how do you think they're feeling? So a lot of you mentioned smiling, or how does it make you feel? Yeah, you've jumped onto the emotional connection. And finally, the last one there is, who do you think took this photo? Now, this is often one of the questions that often gets missed. We're looking at a picture, but there's a whole nother side to the picture that we don't see. If we ask that question, we're giving the learners freedom to personalize what they're talking about. They can create the story behind them. You know, that's a really nice critical question. And so what I try to do when I'm thinking about images and using the great images we have in course books, especially think about my observational prompt. What can I see? My emotional prompt. How does it make me feel? How might it make people feel? And a critical or creative prompt. That is, how can we get the learners thinking a bit further than just the front of the picture? And all of this does is it's challenging, not too challenging because they'll use the language they need, but it also gives them a great chance to share ideas and start to communicate. And when we communicate, we feel good, basically. Nice. So the next point I want to do is also not forget that we have objectives in our book. So typically we could start with the image, but it's important that we let our learners know the objectives of a unit or of what we're doing in that lesson. At the beginning of each unit in Think, you have the objectives box. This talks about the functions we're covering, the grammar we're covering, the vocabulary we're covering. It gives them an idea as well. It lets them know where they're going, right? It lets them know the objective. So we can outline these objectives, what we'll cover as a group, but then we can also encourage our learners to think about personal objectives. We're going to be doing this today, but what would you like to learn? Is there anything that you think you might want to learn that could be related to this topic? Okay, and as teachers, we can try to find ways to help them discover what they want to know. One really nice way we do that, we can use KWL charts. I don't know if anybody has used a KWL chart before. Is anybody familiar with that? Let me know in the chat box. But what they are is a simple activity where before we start a lesson or an activity, we write down, what do I know about this subject? What do I know? Then we move on to, what do I want to know about this subject? Okay, and then after we've finished the lesson, the project, the unit or the term or whatever it is we're focusing on, we think back and say, well, what did I learn? So here's what I knew at the beginning, and here's what I've learned at the end. Okay, so the idea being that we're constantly asking our learners to predict, plan, think about what they want to do, and then look back. Okay, now here's the real slight change to the KWL chart. We can add a couple of categories there as well. We can add how did I learn it and how well did it go. So how did I learn it? We can think about what did I do that helped me learn about family vocabulary or about the functional language we were looking at. What really helped me? Well, we're encouraging our learners then to think about their own progress, what works for me. And when we know what works for us, we can apply it more and hopefully improve how we learn things. Yeah, metacognition, nice. And finally, how well did it go? Now, this is more about identifying success or rooms for improvement. Yeah, so how well did it go? We can think about what was it that particularly worked? Where did I probably not do my best work? Or where if we're doing a project, what made this project not go so well? Or how could I improve it the next time? Okay, so all about thinking about what they're doing and what they're learning and how they're learning. So this is a lovely card. We can share with you a link a bit later on if you want to, the activity cards from the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. It's a really great pack that's been put together by the research team. I really recommend you find out about that. Moving on, talking about personalization, a really, really, really important thing that we need to be doing when we're talking about personalizing language is thinking about how we can encourage them to reflect. Now, within Think, we have test yourself sections. These are really nice. They're really condensed opportunities for the learners to engage with the language and the text and what they've been covering without any consequences. It's kind of a nice way for them to take control of their learning. And we can use this whenever we want, really. We can use it at the end of a unit, or maybe you want to use it mid-unit to see how the learners are getting on. We could use it as a practice, maybe. Okay, but the key is to use it and try to encourage the learners to think a bit deeper about it as well. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, first things first, give them control of their own learning. That's the key. We want them to take responsibility where they can. Let's be honest, teenagers do like to sit back and be told what to do. It's often the case that you have to push them a bit harder than you would like to, right? Some learners we have that are really motivated and really good go-getters, but in my case, in my experience at least, it's a lot of pushing learners along. When we start to give them control, they start to see that they can make a difference. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point is a nice little technique, the reduce, reuse, recycle. Also has nice environmental connotations. Yeah. What is the reduce, reuse, recycle task? Well, what we do is once we've done a test yourself section like the one you can see on screen, we do a small activity where we reduce it. We summarize at least one thing you know really well from this unit. We reuse, we highlight at least one thing that you're going to use in the next unit. And we recycle, which is identifying at least one thing you need to do a bit more practice on. Okay. This is really nice because it starts to create a cyclical approach to learning. It's not just, I finished this unit, I move on. Okay, it's now, I finished this unit, how can I put it into practice? Okay, and these test yourself pages are just the ideal place to do that because it summarizes key language and key vocabulary from the unit. It gives us something more tangible that we can then take forward. If you look on the left, again, the vocabulary, well, there might be some vocabulary we can use in the future. The grammar, of course, we're going to use grammar. It tends to recycle itself a lot and reappear. And also the functional language, in fact, I should mention, is probably the easiest thing to use because it's practical. It's something that can be applied to many different situations. Okay, the grammar, maybe the learners are having a bit of difficulty with the grammar. And so they could maybe focus on recycling one part of this. Maybe in Spain, where I'm based, there's a big problem with many and much. Okay, that's the hardest thing for Spanish people because in Spanish you tend to get mucho, which is just one word. And so that would be one thing that probably my learners would identify. They would probably go, many and much is something I need to work on. Okay. And another great thing about reusing, like highlighting something to reuse, another great technique, that we can do is use Post-its. So if they write down what language they're going to reuse, okay, and then we encourage them to stick it at a later page in the book, right? Then they're going through and we're going through the unit. All of a sudden, this Post-it appears, a sticky note appears on the page. They're like, oh, I remember, this is what I had to use. And then they're prompted to use it as well, you know? Nice, so that's like letting them reflect. We need to encourage our learners to reflect. And that leads me on to the final point for this first section. Oh, no, sorry, it doesn't, not just yet. So what do you think? So what we're going to be doing here is looking at personalization. As I mentioned earlier, right, knowledge is easier to remember when it's personal. We tend to talk about ourselves. You know, we tend to talk about our life, our relationships, our friends, our family. And so we need to offer opportunities for our learners to create a link with them, the content to themselves. And one of the big factors that's really, really useful is cultural awareness. That's a really nice way to link content to the learner because we all have our own cultures, okay? And we can compare, and we do this all the time. Yeah, and in our culture pages here, you'll see, so you'll see that the activities are focused in a very specific way. Number one, look at the pictures. Okay, remember the first task I showed you here? What questions could we ask? We got another opportunity here with 4 wonderful pictures. Okay, we could encourage them to think the observational, the emotional, and the critical or creative. Next, we've got read and listen to the article. We've got input and information. And then finally, we've got what family traditions are there in your country? So what that's doing is taking the content, pulling it out and applying it to you and your class. You know, that's what we want. We want to take this. This is really great. Okay, family traditions. In Germany, they have their first day. And in Japan, they have this. What about us in Albania, Macedonia, Croatia, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, wherever you are? How does that relate to me? And how does that relate to my learners? And again, that moment is often where it starts to click. It starts to personalize it. We can start talking about things. So again, we're taking it relevant. We're making it relevant here. We're taking content from the course, we're pulling it out, and we're applying it in our context. And I like to use a term when we talk about this called heads up. So we've studied, we've learned, we've practiced, we've learned what's in the course book. Now let's take that useful language and knowledge and information and let's apply it. And that's where heads up comes in. We're not heads down anymore, we're heads up and we're talking and we're using the language. Moving on to the final point, and this is the most challenging, and I'm sorry, I don't have a really great activity to show you. How about making it engaging? Because every group is different, right? Every group has its personality, has its preferences. Okay. One thing I like to do is listen with my eyes as much as my ears. What does that mean? It means keep an eye on body language. Look at the learners. Are they slouching in their chair when you're talking about a topic? If they're doing that, well, they could be lazy, it could be habit, they could be cool, but typically they're not engaged. If they're talking to you, if they're commenting, you know, or they're talking to their peers about the topic, we can think, oh, maybe that's something that works. Okay. Listen for the bigger picture. Okay. Listen for the bigger picture. Think about what is working, what engages them, and then try to find other ways to link to that content. Okay. Or link to that topic. I say different ways because we don't want to repeat. Okay, we don't want to repeat with teens, especially. That's really demotivating if they see the same thing over and over and over again. Oh, we've done this is boring. No, they want to see something new, something different. So it's our job then to think about loads of different topics and different interesting and engaging texts and listenings and videos to bring into the classroom. Yeah. Nice. So does anybody have any other ideas that they could share in the chat box, thinking about how we could engage our learners or how we could use them? There's a lovely comment in the chat box, and I'm not even going to attempt to say your name because I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to lots of names, but the heads up idea should be included in the textbooks. That's precisely it. The heads up idea is an idea that we have everywhere, and it's applicable to think, especially because the topics are designed in a way to bring you up and bring you into the lesson and bring you into a conversation. It really is a nice flow from the book. Now, I like what you think. What do you think is a good question? I like what you think because it's open. Open questions are always really good as well. If you want to share and get them to share with you what they want to do. Competition in class is always engaging. Be careful. I always say be careful with competition because some teams are really competitive and others don't want the competition. Nice. Okay, good. I'll leave that there. Please do keep sharing ideas in the chat box. Are there any other ways you try to encourage your learners to engage with the class, or how you try to make it more relevant? Nice. That's a really nice one as well. Encourage them to think about how to take it to the next level. That kind of links back to the KWL chart, right? That links back to the idea of this is what I want to know, and here's what I've learned. How can I go forward now? That's a nice comment. Lovely. So in that first section, what have we seen? We've seen outlining our objectives. Remember, we said that it's clear that the learners start from somewhere familiar. We know where we are. We know what we have to do. We know what the objective is. It's not just abstract learning of a language. Number two, we give them opportunities to personalize the content, to have a look, have a think, and take on a more active role in their own learning. And finally, listen with our ears and our eyes. By that, it means look at the learners, see how they're reacting, see how they're behaving, not just what they're saying. So that is the first part over with. Please do share ideas in the chat box if anything comes to mind as we go through. Okay. And that leads us on to the second section. Who are you? So when it comes to motivating teenagers, okay, we have to think about their current situation, okay, as well as if they've just joined the class or if they've just moved to secondary school from primary school or elementary school. They probably don't know who each other are. In many cases, they've not seen each other because of masks, okay? And it might be the first time they actually get to see each other. Or they might have even just come back from online teaching where they've been on the online classroom. And maybe they haven't developed all of the skills they need to participate in a group with people. Here in Spain, just today is the first day that children can be in school without masks. Okay, so now they can sit in class and they don't have to have their masks on. So today has been, I'm sure, for many, many teachers, chaos, because it's excitement, it's nerves, it's, I don't want to, I want to, you know, it's a whole world for them, okay? We have to remember that. We have to help them navigate this. And how do we do that? Well, you can't learn to be in a group if you don't interact in a group. You have to interact with people. You have to interact with your peers. You have to have conversations. More than that, you have to listen to your colleagues. You have to have help from them or help each other, you know. And finally, it can't all be prepared or structured. We need to let them talk. We need to give them a bit of freedom. They need to get to know each other. So number one, encouraging peer interaction. Again, I just pulled out another page from Think Here. This one is talking about film families. Okay, so old films, great families, talks about how there are lots of different families in films, and the activity encourages learners to think, who is your favorite film family? Okay, so number one, they have to, well, activity 7 here, they have to think about their favorite film. Then they move on to making notes. And then finally, they work in groups. Okay, it's a speaking task. What we're doing is we're making sure that learners have time to prepare. If you look in the first activity, they've got structure, it's ordered, they're given a list that they select from. Then they move forward and they put it into a bit of practice here. They take notes, they write down, they answer a prompt question here. Are they a good family? And then finally, they move on to the group work. Okay. This is really important, okay? This structure of allowing our young learners to rehearse, to practice, to think about what they're going to say, helps them then participate later. And if they can participate later, they're going to feel like a part of the group. And if they feel like a part of the group, they're more likely to participate in future occasions, okay? So build up confidence slowly, give them the support, give them the opportunity to rehearse, and then put them in the groups. So there's a nice comment in the chat box. Just have a quick read of it. I really like that, yeah, covering the face and nose. So it is a funny situation, you know, and there's a saying, there's a thing that's been going around here in Spain. They say, people, I never realized how much happens in the mouth, because so many people, I don't recognize them, you know, until you see their mouth, you know, the eyes and everything, and you don't recognize them. It's the mouth that calls a lot of attention, isn't it? Anyway, I am distracted. Moving on. So encouraging peer interaction, we can also do that online. Okay, if you're still in an online learning scenario, what we need to do is create the right conditions for the online task. We need to create a situation where learners have enough structure and enough freedom to be able to share their ideas, enough space for them to practice and rehearse. Now, Cambridge One is the online platform we have. where you'll be able to access the online collaborative tool for Think, and it works in very much the same way. They have vocabulary activation tasks. They learn about the activity, they learn about the vocabulary, they're reminded, they're given a chance to think. Then they're given an activity to review and put in some structure, some language, and practice some sentences. And then finally, there's a space where in their groups, they have to share ideas and they can have a conversation online. Okay, this is all it's not live. They don't have to do it all at the same time together. It's asynchronous, right? That means they can take as much time as they need to think, to process, and to understand. If you're in the classroom already, this is a really nice tool as well that we can use to manage projects online, because we know with a lot of confidence they're going to have access to the vocabulary, the language, and then finally they have a space to collaborate. And we as teachers, of course, can see their comments and how they're doing and join in their conversations as well. Okay, so think about the interaction, and you could maybe even blend the interaction. You could take online activities and bring them to the classroom. Again, all the more interactive. Maybe your school is fortunate to have some sort of tablets or computers in the classroom. Maybe they can work online, in class, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've seen kids tend to do this a lot. They tend to stand next to each other and text, and they're just texting each other. I've seen this so many times. It's a common thing now. It's like the public space and the private space. Could do that in as well here. Okay, so there's different ways that we can encourage interaction. And the next one is encourage peer teaching. So I'm going to show the same activity here. Yeah, we've got the same three things. What's really nice about this task in particular is it encourages them to peer teach. It encourages them to get more relevant input from their peers, because we're doing the same task, but I don't know, Sonia has done it differently to me. She's put it in a way that I never thought about using the language. Or I like how you did it more than how I did it. Let's use your phrase. And you're learning from this interaction. They're learning from each other. They're building a relationship within the classroom. And those relationships are what help keep teens motivated. They're very social creatures. They want to relate, they want to have groups, they want to feel a part of something. So the more opportunity we get them to work together and become a group, the more likely they're going to have a motivated attitude in the classroom. Another reason it's really important is it gives us different perspectives. It allows us to see different ways of expressing the language. It also allows us to see good use of the language and bad use of the language. Okay, if another learner has made a mistake, that in my books is not a negative. That is a positive, because it's a learning moment. That's a moment where we can go, oh no, this one isn't right. Why isn't it right? Because you needed to use it in past participle. Okay, so what would the correct way to be? Right? We need to encourage the learners to start to pay attention to each other's work and see if they can learn from each other. Which is my final point there, showing other ways of using the language. Okay, so we are thinking a lot about this in a practical way, but there's a big point we're missing, which is, how do our learners know what to do? Do they know how to do it? Well, probably not. So we need to provide them with the support. How can we do that? Well, we can give them different perspectives. We can train them to think, okay? We can give them the skills that they need, as well as the tools they need to do these collaborative activities and these peer teaching activities. Another one Another thing we need to do is also provide them with a bit of structure to speak. So this is what we were talking about, let them talk a bit, right? We want to let them talk about their things. We need to give them the confidence and give them the skills to be able to communicate well, clearly, and in a way that's appropriate for the classroom. To do that, well, if we don't support them, they're going to probably use their first language, no, whatever that might be. But if they have the tools at their disposal, if they have the key language, or if they have language prompts and they've learned different ways of saying things, they're probably more likely to use it. Okay. And again, this comes back to this functional language, this practical language, this developing speaking is something we can go back to. We can look at these functions and remind ourselves, remember what I mentioned earlier about planning ahead. What am I going to use in future lessons? Yeah. So these functions are a really great way of putting really specific things that they're going to try and use in the future, building confidence, building awareness of the language, and building the skills they need to be able to speak and communicate in English. Okay. Another thing here is also encouraging our learners to develop life competencies. Okay, here's a typical life competencies task from the course: speaking, speaking, speaking. We want them to talk, we want them to communicate, we want them to compare their ideas. But at the base of this, we're encouraging them to become aware of their attitudes, the competencies that they need. Okay. If you look here, this one is about saying sorry. Sometimes we're not the nicest people. We all have our good and bad days. We need to learn to say sorry. And this lesson here gives us a bit of resource to understand why we need to say sorry, when we need to say sorry, and also some language on how to say sorry. Okay. This is also a nice place where we can go in and share we can personalize the language. So in summary for that section, encouraging peer interaction, encouraging peer teaching, and letting them talk a bit. We want to encourage them to work together. We want to encourage them to help and support each other. And we want to encourage them to have a bit of free speech between them, not just redrilling what we've been learning in class. Okay, again, all of these help build a community for learning in the classroom, a community between learners, and hopefully increase their motivation to participate and be a member of the group. And that leads me on to the final section we're going to look at today. And I would like you guys to share in the chat box very quickly, how do your learners use technology in their daily lives? So we're going to be looking at technology. The topic is be realistic with technology. Okay, if you could tell me, how do your learners use technology in their daily lives in the chat box? Number one, straight in there, Feza, yeah, social media. That's absolutely number one, I think. Any other ideas? Social media. To play games, yeah, for sure. Don't just think mobile phones. Maybe we can also think about tablets or computers. Yep, YouTube videos, chat with friends, to pass homework between them, texting, films. Yeah, sadly not enough learning. Yeah, for sure. They use it, right? I really like that last comment there. They use it everywhere for everything. They are addicted to it. Too true. Too true. Okay. I'm going to share with you my suggestions. I think you've all mentioned them. Entertainment videos, shorts are the new things with our TikToks and our YouTube shorts, these little video clips, even shorter now. Games, chatting, to look for things, maybe not for school. At home, they might use the computer to make a presentation or to do a school project. Shopping, a lot of that is done online, and entertainment is the big one, right? So here are the points I'm going to talk about now. Number one, start from somewhere they already know. Number two, variety is important. And number three, less can be more. Okay. Here is an activity page from Think. Okay. And the great thing about this course for me is I have so many different ways to engage with content. I have videos, I have collaborative activities in class, I have mobile practice or online collaboration spaces, I have games to practice the language. And even in the classroom, I have an interactive whiteboard with activities for where I can. Doesn't have to be on the whiteboard, it can be on the computer, it could be on the screen somewhere, you know. These are all great ways of engaging our learners. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the Grammar Up videos in the previous webinars. Lovely. And there are other great videos there as well. I'd like to show you one quickly, just to sort of show different ways of engaging with the teaching. So I'm going to show you a short clip from this grammar video, okay?
It's in...
Okay. It looks like my video has died.
Kitchen on the microwave. Put it in your bag now, otherwise you'll lose it again in 5 minutes.
There are many alternatives to if in conditional sentences, provided that or as long as are used in the same way as if, but they make the main clause even more dependent on the condition. As long as, or provided that it's somewhere in the house, we'll hear it. This condition is essential. The word otherwise is used after an order or suggestion to indicate what the result will be if the order or suggestion isn't followed. Put it in your bag now, otherwise you will lose it again in 5 minutes. In this sentence, put it in your bag now is the order.
Okay, I'll stop it there just quickly. It's jumping around a bit for me. I don't know how it is for you there. But this is an example of using digital resources. We can encourage our learners to access these videos at home to better understand the grammar. The great thing about having grammar taught on videos, and these are really lovely, I have to say, is we have examples, explanations with colors and really clear guidance. What's good about that? Learners can watch and watch and watch again and again and again. Okay, so starting from somewhere familiar, using videos and tools in a way they're familiar with is really nice. Number two, variety is important. I showed you all the different ways that we could engage with the content. Remember that they can access the vocabulary, the grammar, etc. through the physical book. They can access it through peers in collaborative tasks. They can access it in the mobile-friendly digital version of the book that you have as well. You can access it on videos, online tools like Practice Extra. So I jumped ahead there. Practice Extra is a great tool that comes with Think that allows the learners extra practice. Name's in the title, right? It's a tool to reinforce the learning that's going on in the classroom. So remember, try to just not always use video in the same way. Try to change it up, try to make it different. Then include maybe one new tool afterwards. Okay, remember also that when we're talking about technology, it's not just about using lots of cool new tools. It's also about teaching our learners how to use technology and being aware of the dangers and risks that also come along with it. There's loads of great topics throughout Think that help us address these situations in a sort of friendly way. Most of them are linked to the train to think activities. So we're encouraging our learners to be more critical about different topics. And that brings me to the end of that section, which is just quickly run over, think about where we start. Don't go too far. Don't use completely strange resources before the learners are ready. Try to build up to using new resources. Use content that they are familiar with. Number two, don't just do the same thing over and over. Try to use the technology in different ways. Try to keep it dynamic. And finally, don't choose everything at once. Sometimes less can be more. Okay. And I can hear you all screaming because we're coming towards the end of the webinar. There are only 3 things. There were only 3 things, but there were 5 messages throughout. And I wonder if you picked up on them. They were, number 1, encourage collaboration, encourage them to work together. Teens like to be a part of a group. They like to work together. We can encourage that. Number 2, encourage social interaction. Help them develop relationships between them. Let them develop conversation, find out about each other, and try to create a group dynamic. 3, make learning accessible. Don't go too far away. Don't give too abstract topics straight away. Start from somewhere familiar. Start from a point that they can engage with. Number 4, make it personal. Give them opportunities to take the language heads up and put it into practice. And finally, don't change how you do things all at once. If you change everything at once, it's going to be stressful for you, stressful for your learners, and stressful for everybody. What you want to do is to take it slow and gradually build up the confidence with the learners to be able to do different activities. And that leads me on to questions. I don't know if there are any questions.
Hi, thank you, Mark, for a really interesting session. Yeah, we've got a question. Actually, it's again, you'd probably like to comment on it really. So it's really about, if you start every unit of the course and you're following the same sort of structure each time, how do you stop teenagers getting bored?
Nice. Yeah. So the easiest way to come to this is to think about routines. Okay. We as humans and people love routine, and that's what the course offers. It offers the structure. The way we engage with the resources there is where we can create the dynamic interaction. So this goes to, like, maybe one week we do it in one way, but the next week or the next unit, we think about using other tools, the videos in a different way. Maybe we do a flipped learning, and now instead of watching the video in class, you're going to watch it at home. Or maybe you decide that this unit, you're going to do the test yourself at the beginning. Let's see what you know. Just little changes. They don't have to be grand changes. Just little things make a big difference. Those little things help keep learners on their toes. It's different, but it's also based in the familiar.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Summarize that, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and another kind of thing, again, you'd perhaps like to comment on is if you have a class and you have some disruptive students in the class, maybe more than one disruptive student, how do you kind of deal with that?
Yeah. So disruptive learners is a big one, isn't it? And people, kids, teens, don't act up if it's not for a reason. They don't do it out of spite. There's normally something behind that, right? A lot of the times it's outside of our classroom, but there are many occasions when it's in the classroom, and we have to be open and empathetic, and we have to try and think of the learner, pay attention to the learner, give them a bit of attention, and try to really understand them to see how we can bring them into our classroom. One of the things that I've noticed is mostly disruptive learners feel like they're being ignored, or feel like they can't engage with the tasks. If they can't engage with the tasks, I'm sat there bored, what can I do? Well, I'm going to throw my pen across the classroom, or I'm going to start talking to everybody to try and get some attention. If we can get them on board and we can create a situation where they are able to participate, they're included in the classroom, then we're probably going to have less disruptive learners. One side comment to add to that, be careful of your bias. When you have a disruptive kid, we tend to label them unfairly most of the time. Oh, that's Daniel. He's a naughty boy. You know, he's the one who misbehaves. Once you label someone, you expect a behavior. So you want to try not to label learners. You want to try and give, I know it's really hard and I'm speaking like so easy, but it's trying to make sure we don't hold a grudge or a bias on that learner when we go into the class tomorrow. Even if yesterday they were the most annoying little person in the world, we want to go into the classroom with a clean slate, give them an opportunity to show that they can be a part of the group.
It's easier said than done, isn't it?
Very much so.
I suppose on the opposite side of that is if you have learners in your class who, you know, who are shy, and I know somebody mentioned that in the chat actually, it's like, you know, people who are shy, who don't like to speak out, the quiet ones who maybe feel embarrassed or fear of looking stupid, you know. So how do you kind of encourage those kind of learners to speak a little bit more?
Yeah, so shy learners in a language classroom is almost always seen as a negative, because they're not participating as much. And it's not that they don't want to participate, it's just they're not comfortable to participate. So when we're in the classroom, we need to try and create a safe environment for those learners as much as everyone else, where they feel that they can participate if they want to. We all know our shy learners. We all know the learners who are a bit quiet. If we can give them a space to share their voice, then they're more likely to share ideas. On another side, if they're not a strong learner and they're shy, what we can do is create activities where they get lots and lots and lots of practice on rehearsal. You know, they get lots of opportunities to practice what they're going to say, as short or as long as it might be, so that when it comes around and they have to share, they've already in their head or with a partner or with a group, they've practiced it 4, 5, 6 times, and they just have to say it and get it over with for them. It's just about trying to create a space and giving them time to rehearse.
Okay, well, we haven't got many more questions now. If anybody does want to pop a question in the Q&A box while we're just sort of wrapping up, and I'll keep an eye on it, and then I can raise that with Mark. But if not, we've probably nearly run out of time anyway, Mark. So thank you very, very much, Mark Meredith, for a brilliant session. And this is actually the last one in our Think webinar series, but you can catch up with all the webinar recordings because we're putting them all on our YouTube channel. And there are 2 previous webinars as well by Herbert Puchta. So I'd advise, if you haven't seen those, definitely catch up on those, because there's a great little series of 3 webinars on Think Second Edition. And also, don't forget, you can visit the Think Second Edition web hub on our website, and that's cambridge.org/think2e. I think we've put that in the chat, the link in the chat. And you can download samples and see all the components of the new course, and of course, all the videos and things that Mark's been talking about today. And of course, you can always talk to your Cambridge representative as well. So thank you, everyone, for a really useful and interesting session. Thank you, Mark. And goodbye, and have a really good rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.